think you really have to be aware that money serves many, many purposes, and work serves many, many purposes, more importantly, right? And money is just one of the purposes that work serves. But meaning is what we all need, and community is what we all need. And if the removal of work also removes your meaning and it removes your people and all it leaves you with is money, then you're going to be in trouble. You are going to be in an existential crisis very, very quickly. And so as you look to sell your business, you better be doing some planning for those other things that matter more deeply, that are going to be sustaining you.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Millennial Money Canada podcast, episode number 19 already. I'm your host, Guillaume, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Sam, as well as our guest, Dr. Moira Somers. First, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast. And also, if you're a new listener, welcome. Our goal with this podcast is to help you elevate your knowledge about finance and other topics in life, so that you can live your best life, build wealth, give generously, and leave a legacy that you're proud of at the end. This episode is delivering just that. We dive into the psychology of money, as well as giving advice, how to help clients follow our advice, implement our advice so that they can step in the best version of themselves based on your values, what's important for you, and what you really want to get out of life. And that's what we covered in this episode. We had Dr. Moira Somers, who is a psychologist, a family wealth consultant, and an executive coach based out of Winnipeg, Manitoba. She specializes in the psychology of money and assists individuals and families with the complexities of wealth and overall financial decision making. She has an international bestseller book called Advice That Sticks: How to Give Financial Advice That People Will Follow. And I've personally took a lot of extremely valuable information from her book, which helped me be more effective with my clients, not only in delivering advice, but connecting on a deeper level with clients, better understanding what's really important to them, and then delivering advice in a way that lands with different types of people, and also ensuring that there's the buy-in from the client into the advice that is being delivered. So this really helped me deepen that whole process, which is also something that I'm striving to improve on a daily basis. So I really hope that you enjoy this episode, especially if you are someone who is in a role who is delivering advice. I think this episode is going to be extremely useful, as well as her book. And if you're someone who is receiving advice or looking at professionals to get advice, then that can help you as well to align yourself with someone who is delivering advice in a way that you enjoy receiving, and that makes it easier for you as a client to follow. Let's get to the episode. Dr. Moira Somers, welcome to the Millennial Money Canada podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can you share your background as a psychologist and the transition that you've made towards the psychology of money specifically?
Sure. Yeah, I spent the early parts of my career working as a neuropsychologist, so working with folks who had various kinds of diseases affecting the brain. And through that process of dealing with people who had some really unfortunate accidents or nasty diseases, came to see just how much of recovery was affected, not so much even by how much money they had, but by the relationship they had to their money and with money. How financially stressed they were, no matter how many zeros they had in their bank account. When you go to medical school, when you go to graduate school, you certainly are told that finances are one of the determinants of well-being, but you're not really trained in what to do with that knowledge. And so I realized early on that I'd better figure out how to really help people, and how to help couples who were struggling with how to meld different kinds of financial personalities and different kinds of financial habits. And so probably, I don't know, maybe a decade or so into my career, I really began to try and dig into that a little bit more. And along the way, that got me interested into learning if we could apply some of the same knowledge that we had about habit change in general to the field of financial habits. So that's kind of how it all got started.
So I'm curious about some of your background and like kind of what made you transition into because you do a lot of research right now, and as well you do, from my understanding, executive coaching as well, and you do work with a bunch of different financial offices across Canada. Uh, do you work outside of Canada as well, and kind of just generally? Yeah. So like, what made that the optimal direction for you to go? I mean, there's so many different career paths, I guess, in the financial space, and I think I was reading a study, I think from McKinsey, where it talked about the future of financial advice is going to be like more of a relationship manager and kind of more of that financial psychology role. I'm curious what kind of led you down the career path that you chose after having those experiences.
Well, at the time I was part of my work was at the University of Manitoba's medical school. And my area of interest has long been what makes it hard for us to follow through with our own best intentions for our lives. I did my doctoral dissertation on procrastination, for example. It seems like such an innocuous little bad habit, right? Just putting off, everybody does it, everybody can easily admit to it. And yet, it can be literally a deadly habit, right? You put off the things that you need to be looking into, including that lump in your breast or in your scrotum. You put off having that conversation that you really need to be having with your spouse or your teenager or your elderly parent. You put off the things that make you uncomfortable, and you can learn how to just keep kicking that can down the road for so long until there's no road left and you really do have to face things. And so my area of research at the medical school was, how do we help people deal with those uncomfortable things, and what happens when we don't within medicine. And I got asked if I could bring that same body of research about non-compliance or non-adherence, if I could bring that work to the field of finance. Because it turns out that the hardest thing for us to do as human beings, the hardest kinds of advice for us to follow, is preventative advice. So it's really easy for us to follow advice when, the example that I often use is if you have an abscessed tooth. Have you ever had like a really awful toothache? And the dentist gives you some antibiotics, you are never more motivated than at that moment to swallow that pill, right? Like you just want it to stop. But after a couple of days, when the pain has stopped and you still have 4 more days worth of antibiotics to swallow, even if you're motivated to swallow them, you often forget to swallow them, right? And your adherence to that advice just starts to fall off. So the best, even when you're highly motivated, it can be hard to follow advice all the way through. And so what about the advice that would have prevented that abscessed tooth in the first place, right? The advice to floss more regularly, or the advice to stop sucking on the candies all day long. That's the harder advice to follow. And similarly in the financial domain, the best financial advice to follow. Well, you tell me, what's some of the best preventative advice?
Well, you can look at making sure that you're setting up yourself for financial emergencies, looking at getting the right insurances, making sure your money's invested well, and having an emergency fund, paying off debt, all of that stuff, right? Yeah, boring.
I
Yeah.
mean, a bigger one is, especially with the cohort that we're serving, when we're talking about something like retirement and trying to put this in, just that concept in front of them and trying to bring some meaning to it. And they're like, hey man, I really appreciate what you're trying to help us plan here, but I'm just trying to get to the townhome or maybe a home, or kids are in school, and it's like it seems so far away. So I can totally understand what you're saying about giving preventive advice. I think we deal with that quite a lot, unless you focus on taxes, because
Yeah.
taxes can bring if you can give them a tax deduction right away,
Yeah.
then they
Yeah,
understand
well,
very
that's
quickly, and they're very motivated.
that's the
And
antibiotic,
Sam, I didn't,
right? The tax
yeah,
advice
and
is the
Sam,
Yeah.
antibiotic.
I
Yeah.
didn't, yeah. And sure, Sam, I wasn't meaning to be
Yeah.
disrespectful there at all, but the problem with that preventative advice is that it's either boring or it's immediately painful, right? You get no immediate benefits from it. In fact, it's often it's right. I want to spend that money now. I've got stuff I need it for now, and I've got to do this trade off for stuff that would benefit me now for stuff that I can't even see it. And then what if your best preventative advice also includes things like having to contemplate really unpleasant outcomes, like you mentioned, disability insurance or um, getting a will in place, right? Now I've got to think about dying and things that I would really, there are so many other things I would rather think about. And so we know that that's the hardest stuff for people to do. And as a result, we've got 60% of Canadians who don't have an up-to-date will, right? And so we need to try and figure out the best of what we've already learned in medicine, where much of this research has taken place, and see how can we apply it to finance. And so that's how I got into it.
That's an amazing story. And I appreciate you sharing that. I want to go back to something here because if we can kind of jump into maybe some of the research. So when we're talking about changing behaviors and habits and forming habits and things like that, one of the most successful ways, or just experience, like anecdotally, that I've had working with clients is when they've been to hell and back. They've suffered that event that has caused them to either reach out or rethink how they're going to shape their wealth going forward. Maybe it's a bankruptcy in their company. Maybe it's they got themselves into a lot of credit card debt and they're in that space of thinking, I never want to go through this again. And you kind of, that analogy of of getting the antibiotics, it's like they're very willing to take the advice at that point. I'm sure there's parallels to medicine in this. Sometimes we see those people take the advice, implement it for a period of time, and then go back into kind of some old habits that they led them to that in the first place. But in your experience, do people going through some of these catastrophic financial events and life events, do some of them have to experience that before they actually get it through their head that, like, okay, I actually need to change my habits? Or like you said, is there really good ways to actually tell people, hey, you don't need to experience this to actually understand how important it is?
Hmm. I mean, some of us are just, we're kind of hard headed. And we can probably all think of domains where we're not following advice. And we can all think about, well, how come we're not? And think about what would it take for us what would it take for us to finally implement, name it, implement the regular date night with our spouse, name the domain. But some of it is, again, we just need to look at the science. Habit change falls off most of the time. And so what we need to do is to look at what are the things that go beyond motivation, because motivation is hugely variable. What what is better than motivation? Well, stuff like systems. As financial advisors, that you can get people to sign a form once that will allow funds to be transferred so that they automatically go into savings, then that will persist over time. Because once something gets set up, our innate laziness takes over, and it takes a lot to get us to change that form again. Banks know that. That's why our mortgages come out the same day of the month as the paychecks go in. They know how to work the defaults in their favor. So we want to look at how do we make defaults work for our good and not to our ill. We want to look at how we can make things like social support for our good as opposed to social pressures. There's just all kinds of things that if we're thoughtful about it, we can outsmart ourselves in a way that will end up serving us well in the long term. our future selves will be really glad that we did. And frankly, having a financial advisor is one of the ways that we can kind of outsmart ourselves. Our financial advisor can keep us from being impulsive, can keep us from being too hasty about following that latest hot tip that somebody told us about, can say, yeah, you could do that. Or you could stay the course that we talked about for this reason and this reason and this reason. Let's think about why you wouldn't stay that course, right? And can nudge us back into where we might want to go.
I love that you mentioned the systems in place, because I can remember the quote. I might butcher it here, but excellence is basically I can remember the quote exactly, but like it's basically you fall to the levels of your systems. So that's ultimately going to determine your levels of success. And I'm fascinated by that line of work. Question for you here is how much is on the onus of the advisor to implement the systems or help the clients implement systems? And what's your piece of advice to help clients that may not be the best at following systems or leveraging systems for optimal outcome?
I like to think of advisors and clients as being partners in implementation. I think that that's the best model, as advisors are guides that help us navigate our way through sometimes treacherous waters. The the best advisors, much of the time your advisor's like this person in the background and you don't really know what they're going to do for you until the feathers of life hit the fan. I learned really young. You talk about, those people who hit catastrophe. In my family life, it hit really early. My dad, died of a heart attack when I was 13. I saw that financial advisor at the door when I was 13. I remember his name. He was Dennis. I saw what life insurance meant to our family. Those are things that are kind of burned into my consciousness. And what we know is that it's in those major life transitions that whether or not you've done the right things for your family financially, that's where it's going to show up for you. And so it's just really critical that you and your advisor know each other well. And it's important that you tell your advisor, in the past, I tried to do this thing and it didn't work out so well for me. And that the advisor be able to ask, so when have you ever tried to do this thing? And how did that work out for you? Right? That you together, you be able to sort of disclose and the advisor be able to say, is there anything that I should know about your financial journey? When have you ever worked with an advisor in the past? Did that go well? What didn't go so well? What would you like me to do? Have you ever been financially impulsive in a way that, you would have wished somebody could have stopped you from being? What are you really proud of in your financial life? All of those things, right? That if the advisor doesn't know something about you, then she or he can't be of support to you. But it's silly to think that client behavior isn't one of the major things that can't torpedo their lives. We think about massive forces like, how the economy is moving or what the markets are doing. There's only so much that the client can do and that you can do about that. But client behavior is something that needs to be discussed more than it is. And for you to come on board, not as judge, but as partner in that is something that they will thank you for that.
I find it fascinating because often when I'm meeting with people for the first time, and we work, as you probably know, with the millennial generation mostly, we're the first advisors they're seeing most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. One of the things I try to do in every first intro meeting is to provide this level of encouragement to them, to say, like, regardless of where they're at, find something good that they've done and say, well done. Like, that's excellent. I'm really happy that you've gotten there. And the response to that is fascinating because I did it once just kind of on a whim. Like, I hadn't put it into my practice normally. And the first time I did it, the person literally started crying in front of me. She's like, no one's ever said that to me before. And I've just assumed my meeting with you, you were going to just tell me all the things I was doing wrong. And that level of encouragement too, I found, of saying like, of encouraging them on the decisions they've made and building on the good habits they already have in place, I found makes just a world of difference and working with people as well. So that's been something fascinating that I've learned throughout the years and working with clients. It isn't just about like we're not here to be like humanized machines and say like like here you go, here's where you're going wrong, do this instead. It is really about working with them to produce optimal outcomes for them. And I think sometimes maybe advisors, we always try to think optimally in general, like what's the optimal decision for you sitting in front of me right now based on numbers and based on data and based on statistics. If we don't know the person's journey and history, we don't know their aversions, their biases, then that becomes something that probably won't stick with them if we're not kind of catering that advice to who they are personally as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for you to understand, for you to take the time to understand, does what does optimizing mean to this person? Does optimizing to this person mean squeezing every last red cent out of an investment possibility? Or does it mean knowing that, having an extra $10,000 in a low interest savings account versus, a growth fund means that I can just sleep better, and that your ability to say, that's what you need to do, then let's make sure that that's there for you where you need it to be. That you facilitate that conversation and say, no, it's not good that 100% of your funds be there, and let's explain why. But let's talk about what needs to be, in what level should money be a comfort, and in what level should money be a protection, and how do we balance these things? And yeah, that just to really understand, we want investment decisions and financial decisions to be free of the sway of short-term emotion, not free of emotion.
Yeah.
We
Interesting.
we we want to really understand what it means to people.
Ultimately, the end goal
That's
is like it's there is emotion in the end goal of being able to retire when you want to, of being able to create generational wealth, or be able, whatever the end goal is, buying your first home. You're right though. I've never actually thought about it that way. So this is something definitely new that I've learned today, is like you don't want to take the emotion out of the decision. You just want to take it out of the short term implications of the decision, which is a really good line that I might borrow from you in a client meeting in the future. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, but Sam, no one has ever come to me and asked, "Hey, Guillaume, can you help me create generational wealth?" Listen, like I feel in a way that like those are a lot of the concepts that I think we put labels on. Maybe they mean to do that, but like sometimes they might have like different goals, right? They want to achieve certain things, or I want to leave this amount to my kids. They might have like, of course, different goals depending on their setup, but sometimes rarely they will identify it as they'll have something very specific. They might not think like broadly, I feel, whether it's for charity or whether it's whatever is important for them, right? I think wanted to ask you a question here. Mauro, we'll come back to the comment about your dad. Sorry to hear
Yeah.
that, but I think one thing you meant, because the reason why I want to mention it is my mom had a heart attack last week at 58 years old. I know she's fine now and stuff, but it runs in the family. But I think a couple of points that you've covered here in terms of understanding your clients like very deeply, being very intertwined into what's really going on in their world. And that's why we have in our process like the goals and values meeting. And throughout the planning process, we're trying to, or it feels like we're trying to like bring down the walls, especially if it's someone who we just met online. Sometimes the trust, it takes time to build, especially when we just do Zoom meetings and it's not someone that maybe we've been knowing for like a number of years, right? So my question to you is, what are the mistakes that you're seeing advisors making or doing that are basically putting up walls throughout the conversations that they have with their clients instead of breaking those walls down and whether it's intentional or unintentional?
I sure hope they're unintentional. It's many of the same things that medical professionals do. Um, they talk too fancy, so they use a lot of jargon, and they talk too much. They take up way too much of the airtime. And often that is, that's in an attempt to deal with their own anxiety. They want to come across as, they want to make sure they're looking smart, they're looking competent to be handling this client's money. And so they just want to make sure that they're coming across as qualified. And that leads them to fill up the airspace. And it has exactly the opposite effect.
I have an example on that because that's a really good point. So in 2019, I got my CFP designation, and I was really, really proud of myself, right? Like I was 25 years old at the time, right? And I had just gotten the designation, and where I was working at the time, it's a big mutual fund company who did like financial planning, but mostly sold mutual funds to clients. And we were trained to give like this spiel about why people should trust us with their money. And so it was exactly what you said, right? It was like this 5 to 10 minute, like, here's all the things you need to know about wealth. Here's all the reasons why you should work with me. And so I would do that, right? And what I wasn't realizing at the time was it was coming across like this kind of bragging in a sense, was coming across as a lot of insecurity with people as I was like trying to say, like, I'll talk my way into you trusting me. And when I matured a little bit and got with some good mentors and we started talking about process and working with people, I realized that that was actually probably hurting my relationship with prospects and clients. And I stopped talking about my credentials. I stopped actually bringing them up in meetings. I stopped telling them why I'm the best fit for them, and went from just asking questions to listening to the answers, asking another question. And that was the whole first meeting process. Went just like, I would probably ask maybe 10 to 15 questions in that meeting. And it's actually funny because now we have note-taking software for our meetings, and it analyzes the conversations. 85% of intro meetings, our clients are talking. And that was something that was like eye-opening to me. Because yeah, like it to me now, I'm realizing it does come across as insecurity when you're kind of bragging about, why you're the best person, why you're the best fit. And clients care about you understanding them, where they're at in life and what they want to accomplish. And that was probably the biggest transition point for me, where I really started to become more successful as a financial advisor and working with clients. But I take that point. That's a really good point there.
You mentioned having had a client cry when you said something encouraging. And that's another key issue, is that many, many people are just intimidated by this world of money. And they come in feeling deeply ashamed, even when they've done nothing wrong and lots of stuff that's right, or when they have made mistakes. You ever made a dumb purchase? Hands up. Or
Yeah.
Yeah.
hands up if you've ever done something dumb with your money. Got a closet full of, I got some dumb stuff in my closet, dumb stuff in my garage. And so whether it's at the level of purchasing or not having negotiated in a way that you should have before, or whether you trusted somebody that you ought not to have trusted, I mean, it can talk about all the different ways in which you in which you may have made errors. But the fact is that many people find the world of finance intimidating. And to be told that, to be met with just an onslaught of jargon, of financial jargon, to be met with any hint of judgment is just miserable. So that's a really big mistake that a lot of advisors make. They talk too much and they talk too fancy. Those are the two biggest things. And it's the same thing that we have to deal with in medical school, that physicians take up way too much of the airtime, especially in that all important first meeting. There's lots of pressure on physicians, of course, to get to the point in a meeting. But if you interrupt too soon, you don't get to the heart of what people need to tell you. So that's a critical one.
I have a question on this. So I was laughing when Sam was talking about his CFP, because for the last year, I've only been like dealing with or servicing, I would say, retail clients. So retail money over the past 13 months, so to speak. Before I was most on the institutional side. And one thing that I've been really struggling for the most of the year is, and I'm by no means, extremely smart or anything, but like I've done my CFA, I've done a, CFP, CMT, I've done a number of designations in the industry. And one of my biggest challenge was try to meet clients where they're at. And it took me some conversations, and it took me a while to get used to what do I need to say that is necessary. What do I need to say that adds value? What do I need to say that like makes a difference for them? And kind of try to leave everything else while being relevant and impactful and getting my point across, right? But at the end of the day, I also work like really, really hard. Like I study, and it took me like 7 years to pass the CFA. So I spent like thousands of hours studying. And now we have like a deck where we have an intro. We walk through our like kind of what we've done and who we are, so that we give our prices, our services, and whatnot. None of them know what the CFA is in the first place. Like they have no clue. I could tell them like I have like a BWVMP. Like they don't even know what what I mean. I could just make things up. They have no clue what it means. So I think my question to you is, from as a psychologist and as a professional, like what are the things that they're teaching you, they've taught you in the medical field to help you doing the things that kind of I've had to learn, I guess, the hard way, like getting your point across, be more relevant, leave the jargons out. Like, are there any specific things that on the financial side we should be doing that where we could be more impactful that you've learned on the medicine side?
Yeah, that's I think we need to have a whole podcast just
Sorry.
yeah, just on that. When people come into your office, you've already kind of won them, or much of the winning has already been done. They've done the hard thing already, and the diplomas are on your walls. The introduction's been made, and it's kind of the engagement is yours to lose at that point. Just try really hard to not lose it. Try to share the air. Try to make sure that you ask them at the outset of the meeting, what is the thing that you most want to come out of the meeting today? And then at the end of the session, say, and did we do that thing? Did we get to that thing? Make sure that you follow up with the thing that you said you would follow up with. And remember that the thing that that is really, really missing in most people's lives is encouragement and the sense that that there's a path forward. And if you can provide that to people, that they're in good hands with you because you're listening and you can see a path forward for them. And you're going to do due diligence in helping them get there, then you are in such good shape already. One thing about being an implementation partner is to help people get the stuff to you that they need to get to you. People are as disorganized as they can possibly get away with being. I say that respectfully as a neuropsychologist, but a lot of people just don't have systems in place for dealing with paperwork, millennials often have much better systems than others. Their life is much more automated sometimes for them, but a lot of people just don't have a really good way of keeping track of the stuff they need to file their taxes or so if you can help people set up ways of sharing information with you and remembering to get it to you in a timely manner, that is also a really wonderful value add. Doing just-in-time prompts. We think about, why is financial literacy so low? It's because we're teaching 15-year-olds how a mortgage works. Oh, well, that's really useful to learn that in grade 10 consumer math. That's great. But when do you need to learn how a mortgage works? You need to learn how a mortgage works when you're about to get a mortgage. Like there are certain specific points in time. It would be really good to learn how to budget when you're about to get a cell phone. Now, that would be a good time to learn how to read a cell phone bill, for example. Right? So there are points at which our brains and our minds rather are really receptive to new knowledge. And if we can meet people right there at the high school level, at the public school level, at the university level, and in the financial advisor's office, what are they receptive to learning? And can you both meet them with that knowledge and help provide them with some supports that would be needed, not just for knowledge, but for systems, setting up systems so that stuff will get done? That's also a huge value add. People procrastinate often not because they don't want to do stuff, but they just forget. It just falls out of their head and they have no way of reminding themselves to get stuff done.
We've seen the wealth industry start to really adopt a lot of these practices from medical fields like psychology, but it hasn't always been that way, right? Where the industry used to definitely just be transactional. Financial planning was very technical and very maybe reserved for like the wealthiest people. Now we're kind of seeing mass adoption of, psychology in the financial field. When you first started your research and were asked to kind of transition your skill set into the financial field, was that during kind of the adoption period where financial firms were looking to start to go that direction? Or was this still like, this is really cutting edge pioneering into the space? And I have a follow-up to this, but I'm curious where that started for you. Was this like kind of groundbreaking research? Was this stuff that was kind of already being adopted?
I wouldn't even call it sort of research. It was too early. Just the notion that there were two sides to money, that there was a technical side and a personal side. It's been a long time coming. People like Susan Bradley at the Sudden Money Institute, now the Financial Transitionist Institute, George Kinder, people like that who really said we need to do more than just talk about the math with people. We need to talk about the meaning, and we need to teach advisors comfortable ways of entering into those conversations. That was kind of radical stuff 25 years ago. But what Susan Bradley has talked about is that the technical stuff is absolutely hugely important and hugely complex, but so too is the personal side. And that too is hugely important and hugely complex. But here's the thing that advisors need to keep in mind. It's that the personal side has the veto power. You can speak to the technical side all you want. You can be absolutely 100% correct on your legal information, on your tax information, on the latest Monte Carlo simulations that you want to run. You can be 100% correct. And if you do not make it through the personal filter, that this makes personal sense to them, that say if it's a couple, that both of them are on board with these recommendations. Have you managed to figure out, are they in alignment with this? And if they're not, what are you going to do? How can you bring them into alignment? Those are the kinds of things that really matter. I can't tell you how frustrated I am with accountants, say, or certain advisors who will say to a couple, okay, you guys, you need to get that prenup in place. That's their big recommendation. And then they go and they take this couple who have got like their whole life ahead of them, and then they make them go through something that is so dark and so painful, and they give them no help with it. So is that a technically correct recommendation? Sometimes, often. And do they give them any help to deal with the personal side of that? Hardly ever.
Oh,
And do they have like warm, fuzzy feelings towards those technical advisors who've given them that technically correct advice? Uh-uh. And is that damaging? Uh-huh. So we really do need to be thinking about, under what circumstances is even technically perfect advice personally wrong or just inadequate?
it's a tough ask to take an industry that's very entrenched in the technical side and ask them to move to the emotional side. Because there's a lot of training and reinvention that happens in that, right? I'm sure I don't need to tell you that. I know that's something you're probably acutely aware of, but maybe I'm wrong on that.
Yeah,
But
and I get,
yeah,
yeah, I I think the problem is that emotion just has such a dirty to it in this, right? Like you can talk about emotion and you just want to, like, you feel the lip curl starting, right?
yeah.
Like emotion. And you think about all the stuff we deal with in behavioral economics and all the cognitive biases, and we all think that we're all just better than that. Like none of us have cognitive biases because we're all so smart. It's like, yeah, remember what all those cognitive, where they were all identified? They were all identified on MBA students, like the cream of the crop.
Yeah.
Because the fact is that any one of us, under conditions of uncertainty, like these are cognitive conditions of uncertainty, of time pressure, our brains just do certain kinds of default thinking, and we get lulled into certain kinds of traps, and that it won't feel like an emotion as we typically think of it, right? It won't feel like fear or greed or insecurity. It'll just feel like a decision, quite an unemotional decision. So I think that it's often unhelpful to even use the word emotion. And that's why I keep talking about it as the personal side, because it covers emotion. Sure, it does. But it also covers just thinking, and it covers meaning, and it covers relationship, and it covers how decisions are made. And like I said, it covers the fact that it's the personal side that has the veto.
Do you see a future for advisors who don't adopt this? Like, is this the way everything's going? Because we have had an industry that's been successful in this space for a long time without necessarily appealing heavily to the personal side. I, I'm looking at our industry landscape. I'm looking at the adoption of AI to help with the technical side of planning, which is going to be a superpower. Like, give it a year, even it's going to be just a superpower for technical planning. But it's maybe I'm wrong on this. It could have a hard time replacing that personal connection with someone. So is there a future in the financial advice space for people who choose not to adopt this method? What does that look like for you?
I think there are lots of really exciting ways in which people are looking at AI to also help with the personal
Yeah.
side of things, help nudge people when cognitive biases might be at play. I'm writing a book right now on financial misconduct, on financial malfeasance. And one of the problems that we're up against is this illusion of superiority that we all suffer from. We all think that we're better than average. There may be some areas where we're willing to admit that, okay, maybe I don't know, what are you worse than average at?
Worse than average at? When I was a kid, I was making my bed, but now as an adult, I don't know what I'm worth.
You asked
I'm definitely above when I'm driving. That's for sure. No,
Myra,
no.
you asked a guy who runs ultra marathons what he's below average. But that's fun.
I would say no. Well, yeah, no, that's a good point. One thing I've learned, like I've worked a lot on, I would say, is having much higher self awareness. That's something I had to learn throughout like my life, I would say. So maybe for a period of my life, I would probably say, if I'm honest with myself, maybe below average. It's something that, but now, of course, I'm above average. But and also why I'm mentioning that is because now it's picking it up when I'm speaking with people and picking the cues and trying to be better at identifying those cues when maybe I'm losing someone in a conversation or maybe something is not landing and whatnot. Like this is something that, yeah, I've had to work really hard on. What about you?
But with me, oh yeah, I'm definitely below average in a lot of areas. I mean, we just had our first son in June of last year, and that's been an incredible learning experience. Also, I realized I actually kind of suck at time management when it comes to like prioritizing my family at work and spending time with my wife and those types of things. That's been a huge learning experience for me. Also, one of the things I realized was, not to get self-deprecating, but even just like the selfishness side, where you're in a marriage where like, hey, I get to kind of do what I want during the day and all of this stuff, and now it's coming back to me. It's like, well, all of a sudden my time's not mine anymore, and I struggled with the ability to have to give that up, right? And yeah, there's so many areas. I'm pretty critical of myself, and I hope in a healthy way. But there's a lot of areas in my life where I look at myself and I'm like, man, if I can only improve that by like 1 or 2%, then I feel like everything else would go so much better. But so I feel that yeah, there's a lot of areas I can improve on and that I'm probably below average on for sure.
And there's some things that, how's your singing?
Oh, great.
Oh,
Yeah,
definitely better
yeah,
live. Anything music.
yeah.
How's your dancing?
We didn't have a dance at
I
our.
got
We didn't.
moves. I know that.
No.
Most people, if you push people on stuff like, okay, I'm gonna check your singing right now. They'll start going, okay, maybe I'm not such a good singer. But most of us rank ourselves as being better than average on a whole range of things, and it's just statistically impossible. It's just not true, right? But if there's one domain where we have this hyper illusion, it turns out, about ourselves, it's in the domain of morality. We all think that our intentions are purer than everybody else's, that our motives are better than everybody else's, that our ethicality is unassailable, that we could never fail, that we could never be seduced in ways that other mere mortals could be. And so it's just really fascinating to me that one of the ways in which people are most vulnerable in terms of their morality is with their money, in what might tempt them. And in maybe the world is in the shape it's in right now because people have not always been as ethical with their money as we might have wished them to be. Or they've said, well, what can I do? I'm not in control of the world. And so just looking at ways in which we might be able to start examining some of our own biases and examining some of the ways in which we might be able to just nudge ourselves back into a place where we're in alignment with the things that matter to us and how we live our life and how we spend our money and how we earn our living, that these are things that I think millennials have been looking back at, previous generations and saying, maybe, maybe we could do things a little differently.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is probably one of the most important conversations that we have and I have every single day with clients, trying to bring them as close as possible to their values and their goals and what's really important to them. And I will say that I don't know if it's us or maybe it's a reflection of kind of who we are, but the vast majority of people who are contacting us, the vast majority of them have very similar values. They'll value experiences. They'll value, like, rarely someone's going to, I'll meet with someone and it's only going to be material or it's going to be to, show off or that type of. So like when you're talking about like planning for, short-term, medium-term, long-term goals type of thing. Actually, one of my client, like I sent him to buy and his wife buy a new car because they needed a new car and I, put in the plan and everything. And so when they went to the car dealership, our financial planner is sending us here because they just got a newborn and they needed that. But the point is, helping clients spend on things that will derive like a lot of value to their lifestyle, will improve their happiness,
Yeah.
and whatnot. So yeah, that's something that I love doing. I absolutely have a thrill doing that.
Yeah, and it was interesting too. I was reading some research on like the millennial and then the boomer generation kind of divide about there's perceptions and a lot of things. One of the perceptions is that millennials don't have the same work ethic as boomers, and that's kind of been widely looked at. But millennials, when they were surveyed, said that boomers actually taught them to value a work-life balance. And so one of their priorities was to make sure that they got to experience life while also working. Now, in terms of do they actually work less, I've looked at some studies that says they work harder than a lot of people in the boomer generation did when they were the same age. But the idea of valuing those experiences, valuing what money can do for them versus like using it as a tool versus it being the actual conclusion. That's something that's come up quite a bit. And I think that has been unique. And maybe it's not unique to the millennial generation, but they've definitely defined it, I found, and adopted that mindset a lot more. I'm curious if that's kind of coinciding with the new book you're writing too, and your findings.
I don't know that it's been necessarily generational. I think, every generation has got its critics, every generation has got its prophets, every generation has got its movements that some that take you straight down the road of extractive capitalism that have led us to living on a planet that's on fire right now, in ways that need to be checked, and other movements that have called. How long have there been movements calling for us to look at things that matter more than money? Throughout all of human history, you can find writings that really, really call for us to look at that, and for there to be a really careful examination of the morality around some of this as well, the spirituality around some of this as well, the discipline of some of this as well. So, I think Gen Xers have a lot to say about this. I think Gen Zs have a lot to say about this. I think we all have so much to learn from each other. But what's really important is that when it comes to the one-on-one or the one-on-two conversations that we're having with people, I work with families of considerable wealth. That's the business that I do with my firm called Blackwood Family Enterprise Services. We're working with business owning families who are often facing a transition of their own. Either they're looking to sell their business or transfer their business or really look to determine how they want to deal with the wealth that they've created as a family, how they might want to use that wealth to address a cause that is a very, very deep concern to them. And so we're looking to see how do we have these respectful conversations, and these that are sometimes tense. It doesn't respectful doesn't mean that they're not spicy, but how do we really get to the heart of what matters to people? So whether that's one-on-one and one-on-two or one-on-many, being able to find ways of uncovering again that personal side, and then often we have to return to, okay, so this is technically really complex. You often have to get at some very extraordinarily complex governance structures around these things to make it happen. But it's a yin and a yang as you go back and forth between them. And it's not that one is more important than the other. You just have to always be able to have access to really good counsel as you move back and forth.
Have you heard of the story of Jake Kassan, the Movement Watch founder? No. And I feel like this speaks to maybe like a really big area of your expertise. So he started a business and ended up selling it for $100 million when he was 32 or 33 years old. So going from struggling with cash flow profits to all of a sudden at such a young age getting this windfall of cash, he ended up thinking like, "Oh, my life's set. I'm going to go surf on the beaches of California. I'm going to travel the world and all this stuff." As you're talking about wealth being passed down from generations, yes, there's the counsel on the side of the families transferring the wealth down. There's also the side of the generation receiving the wealth, which is mainly who we work with. But the story, Jake goes on and he shared this publicly to talk about how he fell into such a deep depression when he ended up selling his business. He felt he had no purpose. He felt he couldn't actually connect with the average person anymore because who's done what he's done, right? There's no level of empathy or connection there or anything like that. Like, how do advisors, how should we, and first of all, how should the people who are in that situation set themselves up to not kind of like be devoid of meaning when they're all of a sudden they're taken away from their business because they've sold it or they've gotten a large inheritance, so they never need to work another day in their life? What should those frameworks around those decisions look like for that individual? And then how can advisors help advise those individuals in finding meaning?
think you really have to be aware that money serves many, many purposes, and work serves many, many purposes, more importantly, right? And money is just one of the purposes that work serves. But meaning is what we all need, and community is what we all need. And if the removal of work also removes your meaning and it removes your people and all it leaves you with is money, then you're going to be in trouble. You are going to be in an existential crisis very, very quickly. And so as you look to sell your business, you better be doing some planning for those other things that matter more deeply, that are going to be sustaining you. And so most people have some inkling of that, and if they don't, hopefully he didn't hurl himself off a bridge before he you know was able to reach out to people who could help him with that. And advisors need to start building the network with uh, with other people. You need to know not just, okay, who can help with the money management, but who can help with the meaning management, and who are not only, the technically proficient, but the interpersonal experts, and the retirement experts, and who do we connect people with? How do you create a whole community to support these entrepreneurs, these people in transition? What are the causes that they're interested in? And whether those are people who are wealthy or people who are not wealthy, we just need to be creating this whole, what is that, mycelium? I love that image from nature of how there's just this rich interconnectedness, and how can we be talking to people wherever we are to find out the amazingness of what they do and how we can benefit each other in connecting.
Yeah, that's well said. I really echo what you mentioned about, of course, replacing the meaning around work and that it brings. Like I spent 10 months, I got laid off and I had a 10-month period. And I can tell you, of course, I was 32 years old. So it was very uncommon. So on top of shaming myself, like, oh my God, I should have a job right now, or I should already have found something else and whatnot, right? There's that side of things, but also because of my age. But ultimately, I lived like a retiree for about 10 months. And let me tell you, like, there's a lot of time to be replaced. So, thinking about like what a day in retirement will look like and really planning this ahead of time. My personal view, if I can share with you, is that I really think that, it's really important to develop like those habits and those passions throughout your career. And that's why I try to, when I talk with people like around the FIRE movement specifically, is if there's things you want to do, like start now. Because I think a lot of people might think like, oh, when I'm going to get retired, when I'm going to be retired, I'm going to start working out and I'm going to start hiking and I'm going to travel and all this. And I'm just very skeptical about that mindset. And I'm like, really? You might. Don't get me wrong. After sitting on at home maybe for a week or doing landscaping for about 5 days a week, your garden is going to be, green, right? But maybe you'll go to the gym. But I'm just so skeptical of that mindset in life. So I'm really trying to get people like, hey, whatever you want to do, like, start now, go to the Pilates classes, hang out with your girlfriends. Like, you know what I mean? This is what's happening now. So anyhow, that was my takeaway into starting retirement earlier. Maybe it's tied also into like this millennial approach to maybe work-life balance and whatnot that we try to instill. But yeah. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Where's the best place to find you? Is it your website at moneymindandmeaning.com? Yeah. Perfect. We'll put that in the show notes. And as usual, you can find us on mwadvisors.ca if you want to book an entry meeting, subscribe to our newsletter, or get in touch. And again, Dr. Moira Somers, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to all the listeners. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you so much.